Hello viewers, welcome. This is Disease Reversal and Mitigation Studio. I'm your host Fred Mushiri, a health teacher and practitioner based in Kenya. Our topic today, which is very important, is on microorganisms. If you have a question or comment, let me know in the comment section. And if you have a direct consultation to make, contact me on the number provided on your screen anytime and I'll be willing to respond to you. Otherwise, continue to like, share, and subscribe to enhance visibility of these topics as they become live on this YouTube channel. Welcome again for today's topic on microorganisms. Now, I find it very important for us to study the topic on microorganisms because of the panic that has been generated around certain infectious diseases that have been attributed to microorganisms. You've ever heard of historical epidemics such as the bubonic plague, the Justinian plague. You've also heard of the Spanish flu and the London plague, to be specific. It wiped out more than a quarter of the population of Europe. And the dread about an infectious disease arising and wreaking havoc on human life still persists today among the people who feed on this information. You could have heard also predictions about a future airborne epidemic that may come and claim lives. And when all this information is being disseminated, it is in the backdrop of a pandemic that arose 6 years ago in 2019. It was said to be a global pandemic, which is unusual because for microorganisms, they are unlikely to cause global pandemics. But we heard in 2019, it was claiming the lives of middle-aged and elderly people and unusually sparing the lives of little children who ought to have been the first victims because they have low immunity. But this was not the case. So people still have the fear that an epidemic arising from a microorganism may arise and claim lives. And this is the myth we want to debunk. This is the panic we want to eliminate from among people. And in order for us to study this topic on microorganisms, it's also important to understand the origin of microorganisms because there are two opposing views here. We have creationism because we attribute all life to one originator who is God. And we have evolutionism, which suggests about life coming from other simple life forms and developing over the years. Now, depending on which or to which school of thought you subscribe here, it is going to change your view as to the cause of infectious diseases. Because it is in understanding the origin we can define microorganisms properly. If you believe that God created all life, then you can be sure that any microorganism that God created during the 6 days of creation, it has to be genuine. But we also have fake microorganisms, those ones that have been given life characteristics, yet they are not real or genuine microorganisms. The other reason why we have to study this topic is because since the 2019 pandemic, there was a congressional inquiry that was looking into what actually happened in China at a place called Wuhan laboratory, where Americans were accused of using microorganisms and enhancing their function, what we call the gain of function research. And when you hear that a microorganism has been enhanced or its function improved, it is to make it more lethal and deadly, and also hostile to other members of the ecosystem, such as human beings. Now, I would like to issue a caveat here. It is impossible to improve the function of a natural organism, especially those that God created during the 6 days of creation. God has placed a genetic code in all organisms, including the tiny ones we call microorganisms. And this genetic code, once interfered with, either by implanting something or changing it, now the microorganism will become unhealthy and it will stop living. And even the generation of offsprings it is going to bring forth, they are also going to die. And this is what we have seen even in large organisms such as human beings. Anytime you introduce a transplant into the body of a human being, or an implant, or a chemical such as a drug, you change the function. And what happens is that the health of that organism is compromised, including the health of its offspring. So that is why this study is very important, because it will help us to understand actually if this microorganism can be blamed for the infectious diseases that we normally see. Now, so we will be comparing the evolutionism and also the creationism to be able to understand. Now, for those who believe in creationism, like myself, we attribute life to a single source, a supernatural being who is the originator, and he is called God. He brought forth existence from non-existence. This includes life of microorganisms. As opposed to the evolution theory, which claims that life forms evolve from other simple life developing into complex life forms. So we do not have life coming from non-existence. We also believe, according to the fact of creationism, because creationism is not a theory, it's a fact, that God had completed creating all life during the 6 days. And during these 6 days, he was able to create complete life systems. So by the time he rested on the 7th day, the organisms he had created were mature enough to the extent they were able to reproduce, because only mature organisms are able to reproduce. And when they reproduce, they're supposed to produce healthy offsprings. The offsprings should be healthy because they are coming from a healthy mother or father or progenitor. And this is one of the aspects we use to assess whether the microorganism or the organism is healthy. Because if it is not healthy, then it is going to give forth an offspring that is unhealthy. And this means the life and the health of the offspring together with the mother will be cut short and will be compromised. Now, you see, evolutionism has a different view concerning having defects in the progenitor, because they believe of what we call organisms changing form or developing into different kinds through evolution. So it is said, according to this theory of evolutionism, that we can have mutation which will give the offspring an advantageous characteristic. And this is contrary to nature, because anytime the genetic makeup of the mother or the offspring is changed, then that one compromises its ability to adapt in a very competitive environment or harsh climatic zones. So the ability of organisms to be able to survive is dependent upon maintaining their genome or genetic code that God placed in the beginning. So if they change it, then they'll not be able to survive. And that is the reason why, since creation, the lifespan of organisms has reduced. Now, according to evolution, it states that organisms are becoming better. They are evolving to be more competitive and more adaptable to changing environments. But this is not true with creationism. So we are becoming worse, we are becoming more diseased, and we are becoming of a shorter lifespan. Okay, so you can see the contradicting views of both creationism and evolutionism. So I think we need to emphasize this point, because concerning microorganisms, it is said that their ability to cause diseases is because of the fact they are becoming more resistant and they are becoming mutants, or they are mutating. So please note that developing resistance or becoming mutants is a genetic defect. It does not give the organism or the microorganism an advantage. Otherwise, it makes it sick enough not to be able to adapt to changing environments. Because the issue about getting infectious diseases has been built around the false narrative that microorganisms are becoming more resistant and they are becoming more mutated. That is not a positive finding, it's a negative finding. It is making the microorganism, as long as it is natural, it is making it sicker, and the lifespan will be reduced, and it cannot have the ability to cause disease when it is a mutant. So we believe in creationism, where nature was set up by God, and God placed the genetic code in these microorganisms, and if it changes, those microorganisms will die or they'll become sick and have a short lifespan. According to the fact of creationism, we also believe that God created all organisms of varied abilities. We have weaker organisms and stronger organisms, but they are all beneficial to the ecosystem they were placed in. So we say the short grass is as important as the tall oak, as opposed to evolutionism, where organisms with advantageous characteristics such as physical fitness are surviving at the expense of weak organisms. So the principle of evolutionism is elimination of weaker organisms by the stronger organisms. And therefore, the principle of an ecosystem with an evolutionary mindset is based on hostility and murder. And those are the same principles that inspire people today, including those of the political and military circles, where whenever a country that is powerful deems another country an existential threat, they're going to fight to eliminate them. We also have politicians who want to survive at the expense of the weak people in their country. So the principle of evolutionism is inspiring political circles and military powers today. This also includes the war that is going on in Iran, between Israel and Iran. They want to get rid of Iran because it is deemed an existential threat to Israel. So you can see the principle of evolutionism is playing alive in today's politics. And that is why it is based on murder, eliminating the weaker ones for the strong ones to survive. So we believe in a true and a natural ecosystem. God created all organisms with certain benefits to the ecosystem they were placed in, including the small organisms we call the microorganisms. So when you hear of a microorganism, in quotes, that has nothing, that has no benefit to the ecosystem apart from bringing diseases, then you question whether that organism was really created by God. For example, the viruses. There is no known benefit of viruses. In fact, they are said to cause diseases across all animal kingdoms. So they will cause diseases among the animals of the kingdom Animalia. They will cause diseases in plants, in fungi. They will cause diseases. They will cause diseases in bacteria. So for such a microorganism that to continue to wreak havoc across the ecosystem, it simply means God did not create it. And if it was created by God, it has to be beneficial to the ecosystem it was placed in. So that is very important to understand. So in the same breath, we want to reiterate that God's nature does not do any harm. We know the theory of the Louis Pasteur germ theory that was brought by that is currently today forming the basis of modern medicine, attempts to eliminate certain microorganisms because they are deemed hostile to the survival of other organisms, such as human beings. And therefore, the manufacture of drugs that kill to eliminate microorganisms is based on an evolutionary mindset. But you see, the human system, especially the human immune system, does not know how to kill. God's nature does not kill. In fact, the way the body protects itself from pathogens is by creating a barrier so that pathogens do not enter into the body. And if they enter, the immune system will bind. It has certain cells that bind the pathogens and restricts their free movement in the body. And then they are taken to the organs of elimination and they are taken out of the body. So at every juncture of the work of the immune system, we do not see murder, we do not see killing. So it's an evolutionary mindset that attempts to kill other microorganisms. So this is why I said to be able to understand microorganisms and if they actually cause disease, we need to understand their origins. And the origin you subscribe to will determine how seriously you take the issue of attributing diseases, infectious diseases, epidemics, pandemics to microorganisms. Now, let's hear some scientific claims that I can say they are blasphemous because they oppose God and they take away his role in creation of organisms. It is said by science that microorganisms were the first forms of life. They may have originated between 3.7 to 4 billion years ago, long before there was plant and animal life. Here you can see the arrogance of science. They're able to determine what happened 4 billion years ago, even before the scientists were in existence. No scientist has ever lived more than 100 years. But you see, they're able to tell arrogantly about what happened 4 billion years ago. Then we are told that these microorganisms were self-producing. So in this principle of microorganisms being there 4 billion years ago, it does not explain where these microorganisms originated from. So we are told they were self-producing, and therefore they were able to generate other chemical and biological factors that could have given existence to today more complex life forms. It is said at that time they were living in an environment without oxygen, but later they were able to generate oxygen. And this oxygen has become the foundation of more complex life forms. Now, strangely, they were able to generate oxygen, yet they did not use oxygen, and they did not have the mechanism of having oxygen in them. So how did they come to generate this oxygen? Then other complex life forms, such as the human beings, are said to have descended from bacteria. Now, the question is, bacteria are single-celled, yet we are multicellular and we are more complex. How do you expect an offspring to be superior to the progenitor? How do you expect the offspring to be superior to the father or the mother? This is an evolutionary mindset. And Jesus at one point wanted to crush that kind of mindset by saying his father is greater than him because he was the Son of God. It is an evolutionary mindset that would claim, that would place Jesus at the same level with his father, which he did not want to be placed. He said his father was greater than I. So anytime you hear that the Son of God is being placed on the same level and both to be called God, that is an evolutionary mindset. And the devil loves such kind of mindset. So we did not descend from bacteria, because any organism that descends from another has to be inferior to the progenitor. And that is the truth about that is the truth about creationism. It is true. In creationism, we believe that we are becoming worse. We are becoming more diseased. Our lifespan is reducing. But in evolutionism, they are saying we are getting better. Okay? That we are becoming healthier. And that is not true. We are becoming worse, and the offspring has less strength than the mother. That is the truth about natural creation. So, even concerning the microorganisms, as the humans and other organisms become weaker, the microorganisms are also becoming weaker. They are losing the ability, if they cause any pandemics or epidemics, they are losing the ability to cause disease. And it is unlikely that any microorganism can cause a global pandemic, because for one reason we know, they do not have the energy to adapt to any environment in the world. They don't have that ability. In fact, even organisms which are large, like elephants, do not survive in all environments. Okay, it will be much harder for tiny organisms, we call microorganisms, to be able to survive in all climatic zones. Now, divine intelligence has not left us to without future predictions about the coming of pestilences. Now, I want us to consider what Jesus tells us in Matthew 24, verse 7. A very important verse concerning those who fear epidemics, okay, of that are infectious, that may cause a global pandemic. Now, in Matthew 24, verse 7, we are told, "For nation shall arise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places." Now, there are two very important aspects to this verse. Number one, consider how the divine intelligence has laid out the sequence of human disasters. We start with disasters of human creation, that those are the wars, the famines, the pestilence. And then we have a climax of a natural event, which is an earthquake that just comes to bring disorder into what is already disordered. So we start with a groundwork of human events, okay, disasters of human creation, and then the climax, or they culminate in the coming of a pestilence. So we have the groundwork that contributes to the pestilence. And this pestilence have to be in diverse places. The phrase diverse places here means distributed widely. So the pestilences mentioned in the Bible have to be distributed widely. So this means that for microorganisms to be able to cause diseases that are distributed widely, or they are global, then they should have the ability to survive in different environments. It is not so with microorganisms. So they are not able to cause a global pandemic, because that would mean the microorganism will have survivability in any environment in the world. It is not so with tiny organisms. In fact, it is only intelligent uh, it is only intelligent organisms such as humans that are able to survive in different climates, because they can keep warm, they can heat themselves, they can add clothes. But other animals, they do not have that ability. Elephants do not survive in all the environments in the world. So please know that there's a sequence that is leading to a pestilence. And even other inspired writings, for example, Volume 1 of Testimonies, page 268, it gives a prediction of the First World War, and the order is as follows. We have confusion, we have war, we have bloodshed, we have privation, we have want, we have famine. It culminates in a pestilence. So we have a groundwork being laid before the pestilence comes. And this is a prediction about the First World War. Now, the prediction about the Second World War also has the same groundwork. So we have confusion, we have strife, we have war, we have bloodshed, we have famine, we have want, and eventually we have a pestilence. And this is what actually happened during the First and the Second World War. Unfortunately, or sadly, science ignored the groundwork or the circumstances of the war. They ignored that there was use of chemical weapons, there was famine, there was poor sanitation, there was psychological stress. We had wounded people with dirty wounds. They ignored all those circumstances, including privation, and they attributed the pestilence that occurred at the end of the First World War to a virus which was called the Spanish flu. Then at the end of the Second World War, there was another pestilence in 1952. Of course, it started all the way from 1943. And that pestilence was blamed on another virus, which we call the polio virus. And I think viruses, which are said to be microorganisms in quotes, have been a very good escape mechanism by scientists, because these ones you cannot define definitely, because they are said to evolve to keep mutating. So if you are to paint a scientist on a corner to explain how a virus can cause a disease, they are likely to postulate that they are mutating, they are evolving, they are constantly evolving, and by so doing, you cannot fix a definite disease on any virus. So it has always been a very good escape mechanism for any disease whose cause is not known, or for any disease scientists do not want to acknowledge that they do not know the cause, or which the cause they do not appreciate. So the viruses have always been a very good way to escape explanation. We know the original Latin word for a virus was poison, and therefore it was known from the beginning that viruses are poisons. So they are not living entities. They are not living, and therefore they are constrained. Poison is always constrained to the organism. It is to the organism where the poison is. So it's difficult to spread poison. So unless you eat the organism that has the poison, okay? So it's a very difficult way to spread viruses or poison. So the same way snakes have poison, so we can say they have virus, and it is not easy to spread snake poison unless there is a snake bite. So if it is difficult to spread poison or virus of a snake, then I don't know why we should be panicky, or there should be a lot of fear concerning misinformation that there is a pandemic that is being spread by poison or a virus. So that is why understanding about the origins and also the anatomy of microorganisms was important to be able to clear the fear that has been generated around certain microorganisms. Some of them are not genuine microorganisms because God did not create them. And they're not genuine because if you hear that there is a gain of function research being carried out in biological warfare research lab of improving the function of a microorganism, then that one cannot be a natural or genuine microorganism, because any natural microorganism has a genetic code which, when you interfere with it, the microorganism will become sick and cease to live. It will not continue to cause disease. So we need to clear that air. So scientists have given us a list of microorganisms. They say the microorganisms are microscopic in nature and they are living entities. So we have been given bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protists, and these are said to exist everywhere. That is the position of mainstream science. Now, there is no controversy about whether bacteria are living organisms. They are microorganisms. But for viruses, getting the data from science itself, they say they are non-living particles. So for non-living particles to be given life characteristics, that is questionable. It needs to be disputed. Okay. And then the other thing, for fungi, we are not very sure whether to classify them as plants or animals, because they are lacking certain characteristics of living organisms, such as movement. We know all living organisms, according to Genesis 1 verse 28, they move. So they have that life characteristic of movement. But for plants, they don't move. And fungi don't move. So they could be classified as plants. We also know the viruses and fungi were not present during the creation week. God did not create them. Viruses are said to have evolved, and evolution is a different view which is contrary to creation. So they were not present. They are of human creation. For fungi, there was no fungi during the 6 days of creation, because fungi are decomposers. And there was no decay or death during the creation week. So fungus came as a result of absence of life. So they were not present during the time of creation. In fact, we are going to have a topic in later presentations on fungi and why we need to fear them as a major cause of world epidemics. But you see, they have not been given emphasis by mainstream science. And I'll tell you the reason when we come to discuss the fungi. Okay, we need to be careful because they were not present during the creation week. They came later. By default, they come as a result of absence of life. Now, for protists, we need not to fear a lot about protists because you must have interacted with a dirty environment to get an infection from a protist, such as a malarial parasite, such as Plasmodium, or maybe Entamoeba histolytica, which causes amoebiasis. So these infections, which are diarrheal diseases, and sometimes they affect the entire body, such as malaria, they come as a result of interacting with a dirty environment. And as long as we ensure we have proper hygiene and good sanitation in the environment we are staying, we need not to lay a lot of emphasis on protists. So we don't have a lot of controversy in certain microorganisms such as protists and bacteria, but we have an issue on viruses and fungi. Okay, so what we need to be very careful about, it is not the organisms or microorganisms that were present during the 6 days of creation, such as bacteria and protists, but we need to be careful about the organisms, microorganisms that were not present during the 6 days of creation. And these are the viruses and the fungi. Now, the viruses are of human origin, they have evolved, and fungi come by default with the absence of life. Then the position of mainstream science is that these microorganisms exist everywhere. This is not true. They are specific to their habitats. They choose the habitat of least resistance. They have little energy because they are tiny, and therefore they cannot adapt to changing environments. They do not survive in very competitive environments. So they avoid habitats where they are going to risk their own survival. So they cannot exist everywhere. And if they cannot exist everywhere, it means they cannot cause a global pandemic. Now, if you consider the scientific model of classifying of organisms, as you can see on your screen, science classifies all life into 5 kingdoms. And the first kingdom is Animalia, as you can see, followed by Plantae, followed by Fungi, then Protists, then Monera. Of note in that historic scientific classification is that viruses are not classified because they are not considered to be living organisms. And if they are not living organisms, then why are they given life characteristics? They're not even classified in the historical biological classification. So this is what we call the hierarchy of life. And in this hierarchy of life, the energy of organisms descend down the kingdoms. If you start with the first organisms, they are larger, therefore they have more energy to survive in a very competitive and harsh environment. As you go lower the kingdoms, the energy decreases because the organisms or microorganisms are tiny. And if they are tiny, meaning they are not as strong as the large microorganisms. So downward the kingdoms, you also find the number of cells and number of chromosomes also reduce. So the microorganisms here mentioned are single celled. And if they are single celled, it is difficult for them to eliminate the survival of multicellular organisms. We want to clear that fear because the tinier the animal, the weaker it is. This energy is also important because when it comes to causing diseases, it will depend on the energy a microorganism or an organism has. So I do not expect a single-celled microorganism which has a single chromosome to be able to cause the death of a multicellular organism. In fact, apart from this biological classification, we know a normal or natural ecosystem which does not have these kingdoms because the truth about creation is that man was created superior, and therefore he is not of the kingdom Animalia. He was created in the image of God, and he was given dominion over other microorganisms and other organisms. So man is supposed to control, he has the intelligence to control and also to dominate other microorganisms. So it is unlikely that in a natural ecosystem that God created, including those of microorganisms, is going to harm each other. There is harmonious coexistence between all microorganisms, and they are there for our benefit. So if you hear of a microorganism in quotes, such as a virus that is causing diseases across the kingdoms, then that is not a microorganism of divine creation. Now, the differences we have between the large organisms such as human beings and the small organisms, the microorganisms, are for human beings to exploit to get rid of diseases suspected to have been caused by these microorganisms. For example, assuming you had been infected with a microorganism such as Plasmodium, which causes malaria, and you wanted to get rid of them. Because you have more energy than the malaria parasite, you can use simple remedies like a hot water bath to raise your temperature from 37 degrees all the way up to 39 degrees. And at that temperature, the Plasmodium is going to die, but you are going to survive because you have more energy. So that is how we can simply get rid of microorganisms, because they have less energy. The other thing we need to know about the differences in energy is animals with more energy are able to survive or to adapt to changing environments. For example, human beings are able to survive in any environment in the world. They're intelligent, they can look for heat, they can warm themselves up. But for microorganisms, they do not have that ability to survive in any environment. So you'll find that malaria parasites will be found within the tropics, but they will not be found in the temperate zones, in the cold zones. So that is how we do not expect a microorganism to cause a global pandemic, because they do not have the energy to survive in any environment. So this information is very important to help us get rid of the panic that has been built around microorganisms, and also the fear that they are likely to cause a global pandemic and maybe claim so many lives. So in the past, when you heard that a bacteria was responsible for causing a plague in the past, despite the fact that science did not have the gadgets to be able to investigate, we also doubt, because bacteria are part of the human system. You can find bacteria on your skin, in the digestive system, in the respiratory system, the reproductive system, they are there. And their nature, that is their construction, is weak. In their anatomy, they are lacking certain organelles that make them less competitive. And that is why they are able to inhabit the human system, because if they had the strength to cause diseases, I think we have trillions and trillions of bacteria that contribute to more to our genome than our human cells themselves. Therefore, if they were to cause any disease, we could have died a long time ago. But God has ensured that all life lives harmoniously, and all microorganisms and organisms that God created during the creation week are meant for harmonious survival and coexistence. There should be mutual benefits between microorganisms that are natural, that are genuine, and human beings. If you hear of a microorganism that is causing a disease that is global, you have to investigate that far. It can only have come as a result of evolution or enhancement of function, such as the ones that are being researched on in laboratories that have now been militarized by countries of the world. Please note that today, as we talk, warfare has shifted from mechanized weaponry to chemical and biological weaponry. So we have a lot of research on looking for super germs that maybe a superpower may use upon an enemy country to eliminate huge sections of population or soldiers which are perceived to be opposing the country. And we have had cases in the past where, for example, in 1812, where Napoleon and his Grand Army were defeated because of an infectious disease, and they had to surrender to the Russians. So countries today are still looking for supergerms that they think might be used against enemies as a biological warfare, which they think is easier to produce, and there is less money used to generate these weapons of warfare. So we have to be careful about the information we hear. Investigate. If you hear a microorganism is causing a global pandemic, then you have to interrogate, because it is unlikely that it will be a natural or a genuine microorganism that God created during the 6 days of creation. So in our next videos, we'll be looking at the microorganisms and the agents that actually cause global epidemics, such as the fungus. For now, goodbye. Continue to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. Good day.